At 48, Thierry Henry's greatest battle wasn't on the pitch. Behind the goals and trophies, the Arsenal legend spent years fighting severe depression. Stay tuned to hear the haunting words his father said after one of his biggest wins, leaving scars that never healed. Here's what most people see when they think of Thierry Henry. They see the arm celebration after tucking one into the bottom corner at Highbury. They see the World Cup medal in 1998, the Premier League title, the Champions League. He's regarded as one of the greatest players of all time. Some say the greatest to ever play in the Premier League. The statue outside the Emirates, the punditry career, the warmth, the humor, the intelligence. The guy who made va va voom a phrase in the Oxford Dictionary. What they don't see, what he didn't let anyone see for decades, was the man underneath all of that. Behind the electrifying runs and the goals that defined his career lay a deeply personal struggle that would only surface years later. Henry recently opened up about his battles with depression and childhood trauma, revealing a story of healing and self-discovery. And in January 2024, he finally said it out loud. In an interview on the Diary of a CEO podcast, Henry said, "Throughout my career, I must have been in depression. Did I know it? No. Did I do something about it? Obviously no, but I had adapted in a certain way. I was lying for a very long time because society wasn't ready to hear what I had to say." Read that again. One of the most celebrated footballers in the history of the game. A man who lifted trophies in front of packed stadiums, who was mobbed wherever he went, who had the world at his feet, and he was depressed through all of it. Not just for a season, not just through a tough spell. Throughout his entire career, he had to battle through periods of doubt and mental demons, and felt completely unable to speak out about his problems while still a player. He just adapted. He kept going. He put on the kit, went out on the pitch, and gave the world what it expected from him. And then he went home and sat with whatever was underneath. The question that deserves an answer is, where did it all start? Because you don't arrive at that kind of silent suffering without it starting somewhere. And for Henry, it started very early, almost from the beginning. Growing up in a modest Caribbean household in France, his early life was far from the glamorous image many associate with him. His parents' divorce when he was just 7 years old left a permanent mark on his emotional development. Henry was born in Les Ulis, a working-class suburb south of Paris, characterized by low-income housing projects and a diverse immigrant population. His parents, Antoine and Maryse, were of Antillean descent. Antoine from the island of La Désirade in Guadeloupe, and Maryse from Martinique. Both had immigrated to mainland France seeking better opportunities. They came to France with very little. They built what they could. And in that small apartment in the suburbs of Paris, they raised a boy who would go on to become one of the most famous footballers on earth. But even before the trophies, even before the fame, even before any of that, his father remained emotionally distant, creating a void where affection and validation should have been. From a young age, Antoine instilled in Thierry the belief that he would become an exceptional football player. While that prophecy eventually came true, it came at a cost. Henry's self-worth became inextricably linked to his performance on the field. That's the thread that runs through everything. That's the thing that explains so much of what came after. Because a boy who only learns he's worth something when he performs well on a football pitch, that boy grows into a man who cannot separate himself from his sport. And when the sport is gone, that man is left with nothing to hold on to. Henry revealed that the greatest pressure he had throughout his career was simply to put a smile on his father's face. When he left the dressing room after a game, his father would frown. And not only did his father's attitude affect his entire career, it shaped his mindset in ways that stayed with him long after the boots were hung up. That's where the tragedy begins, not with a single dramatic event, not with a scandal or a catastrophe, with a little boy from Les Ulis trying to make his father proud. To understand what Thierry Henry has carried all his adult life, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the suburb, back to the apartment, back to Antoine. From approximately age 5, Antoine Henry coached his son intensively in the basics of football, enforcing a regimen of repetition and discipline, marked by persistent criticism of Thierry's performances, to foster relentless improvement and a fear of underachievement. This paternal approach, while cultivating exceptional drive and work ethic, imposed significant emotional pressure, limiting Thierry's experiences to football-focused activities and contributing to later reflections on a programmed childhood devoid of typical play. Think about what that means for a moment. 5 years old, not playing in the garden for fun, not running around with friends making up games. 5 years old and already being told what he did wrong, already being measured, already being evaluated, already being shaped for a purpose. The neighborhood of Les Ulis, while it had a mixed social reputation, had notably good football facilities, and the community of immigrant families that settled there, many of them from the Caribbean and West Africa, created an environment of intense competition and collective ambition that shaped multiple generations of French football talent. Henry was born into the right place at the right time, with the right genetics. The raw material was there from day one. But Antoine didn't just let nature take its course. He took his son to local matches from a very young age, enrolled him in the junior teams of Les Ulis and Palaiseau, and made clear to Thierry that football was not simply a pastime, but a serious pursuit requiring absolute commitment. He had a particular influence on the technical precision that would become one of Henry's most celebrated qualities. From the outside, it looked like a father investing in his son's future, and in many ways it was. But there was a cost running alongside all that investment, a hidden cost. Henry's childhood was marked by a pressing need to please others, particularly his father, whose approval he constantly sought. This pattern of people-pleasing, which began at age 4 with attempts to make his depressed father smile, would follow him throughout his career and personal life. There it is, 4 years old and already trying to manage his father's emotions, already learning that love and approval were conditional, that they had to be earned, not given freely, earned through goals, through performance, through being better than everyone else on the pitch. He later described the world he grew up in. You have been told since you're young, whether at home or in your job, don't be that guy. Don't show you're vulnerable. If you cry, what are they going to think? I was crying, but technically it was the young Thierry crying. He was crying for everything he didn't get. That quote is something he's describing himself in the third person. The young Thierry, like he's looking back at a child he didn't fully know at the time, like he had to reach adulthood, and then retirement, and then something close to a breakdown, before he could finally see what that little boy actually needed. And then the divorce. His parents split when he was just 7, left an indelible mark on his emotional development. Just when Thierry needed his parents most, they separated. His mother fought hard for custody and won. She then moved him from his dad in their football town to Orsi, enrolling him in Alexander Fleming School to focus on academics. So now the football is interrupted, the stability is gone. When Henry joined Arsenal in 1999, Arsène Wenger immediately switched him back to his childhood position as a striker, often pairing him with Dutch veteran Dennis Bergkamp, and something clicked. Something that nobody fully has a technical explanation for. Wenger saw something in Henry that previous coaches had missed or hadn't bothered to use. He saw that the winger role Henry had been playing at Monaco and Juventus was wasting the most devastating weapon in football. Henry's ability to run in behind, to use that electric pace in the channels, to arrive at the end of things with that ruthless, precise finish. Wenger later said Thierry Henry could take the ball in the middle of the park and score a goal that no one else in the world could score. And so the world watched Henry become a god at Arsenal. And what the world didn't know, what nobody knew, was that every time Henry walked into that dressing room, he was still, at some fundamental level, a little boy from Les Ulis trying to be good enough. Still wearing the imaginary cloak, still running from something he hadn't yet named. His rise to football stardom masked a deeper emotional struggle. His childhood was marked by a pressing need to please others, particularly his father, whose approval he constantly sought. Even at the peak of it all, even in the 2003-04 season, the Invincibles, the season Arsenal went unbeaten across the entire Premier League campaign, he was still measuring himself against a standard that had been set by his father. In a small apartment in the suburbs of Paris, decades earlier, then came Barcelona. The move that should have been triumphant. Henry announced he was splitting from his wife Claire Mary in June, shortly before his transfer from Arsenal to Barcelona. So he left London carrying both a new chapter at the biggest club in the world and the collapse of his marriage. Claire Mary, his wife of 4 years, divorced him in London's High Court on grounds of his ongoing unreasonable behavior. The couple split after Mary discovered text messages to another woman on Henry's phone. Henry lamented how the split affected his father-daughter relationship. He only saw his daughter T 5 times in 8 months, and it affected his playing career. 5 times in 8 months. His daughter, the child he said he loved more than anything, 5 times. And he was playing football on one of the biggest stages in the world the whole time, still wearing the imaginary cloak. The career ended in 2014. Henry concluded his playing career in 2014 and subsequently forged a career as a manager. And right there, in that transition, is where the real story begins. Because up until that point, everything had a structure. There was a schedule. There was a stadium. There were teammates. There were matches. There was always another performance to prepare for, which meant the voice in his head that needed to be silenced could always be silenced by simply focusing on the next game. Take that away. Take away the kit, the stadium, the crowd, the structure, and suddenly there's nothing left to hide behind. The true extent of Henry's emotional struggles became apparent after his retirement at age 37. The transition from being a highly focused athlete to civilian life proved overwhelming. Without the structure of professional sports and the constant validation of performance, Henry found himself facing an identity crisis that triggered deep-seated depression. He tried coaching. He began coaching Arsenal's youth teams in 2015, in tandem with punditry for Sky Sports. In 2016, he was appointed assistant coach at Belgium. Those were manageable steps, roles with support around them, roles where he wasn't the one person being held responsible, and then came the big moment. The first job, he became Monaco head coach in 2018, before being relieved of his duties in 2019. Monaco, the club where Henry had started his career as a teenager. The club where Wenger first gave him a chance. It should have been a fairy tale. He returned to Monaco after impressing Belgium's players as an attacking coach during the country's run to the World Cup semi-finals. He had the reputation, he had the football intelligence, he had the name, but the job destroyed him. Henry was sacked after just 3 months in charge. He oversaw just 5 wins in all competitions, a record which left the club in the relegation zone. The inside reports were brutal. The players never fully got behind Henry. The disconnect was mostly down to his attitude. He still behaved like a player, and according to someone close to the squad, it felt too much like he was still one of the boys. He had never managed a first team before and never carried himself like a manager. His body language, his reactions, and his methods gave away the fact that he wasn't ready for a significant rescue job. French football expert Jonathan Johnson reported that a lack of respect and unhappiness among players contributed directly to Henry's downfall at Monaco. The same emotional walls that protected him as a player, the walls that kept him from being vulnerable, from connecting deeply, from showing people what he was really feeling, became liabilities the moment he needed to manage human beings. You cannot lead people you can't connect with. You cannot earn trust from behind a shell. For someone who cared so much about his own image, the whole Monaco episode was a disaster. And it mattered. Not because the job ended badly. Plenty of first-time managers have bad first jobs, but because of what it represented. He'd gone back to the beginning, back to the club where it all started, to try and prove himself in a new arena. And it hadn't worked. He returned to MLS to manage Montreal Impact, leading them to the playoffs in 2020, before departing in 2021, then returning as an assistant coach for Belgium for 18 months. And then came the pandemic. Locked down in Montreal, away from his children, away from any structure, alone with himself in a way he had never allowed before. The COVID-19 pandemic further exposed his vulnerability as he found himself crying daily without apparent reason. His time spent in Montreal during the COVID lockdown, with no access to his children for a year, marked a turning point. Crying was a regular feature of this period, often without any specific reason behind it. According to him, these emotions must have accumulated over the years, resulting from unmet desires for validation and recognition. The young Thierry crying, he'd called it. A grown man, one of the most decorated footballers in the history of the game, alone in an apartment in Canada, crying without knowing why. Because he'd spent decades stuffing those feelings down, covering them with goals, covering them with trophies, covering them with the imaginary cloak. And eventually, those feelings don't stay down. They come back up. They always come back up. A significant moment arrived during his Montreal farewell, when instead of simply heading home, Henry stayed behind, and something shifted. A crack in the armor. The beginning of something honest. There's a version of Thierry Henry's story that ends at the Monaco sacking and the Montreal tears. A man unable to replicate his playing career in the dugout, unable to connect with his players, sitting alone in a foreign city, crying without knowing why. It would be a bleak place to stop, but the story didn't stop there. And what happened next is, in its own way, the most important chapter. He had to learn what many take for granted: how to love and be loved, how to connect with his children, and most importantly, how to be vulnerable. For someone who had built his life around being perfect on the field, accepting imperfection became a crucial part of his recovery. That's the thing about a life built entirely on performance. At some point, the performance ends. The crowd goes home. The stadium empties. And you're left with just you. And if the only version of yourself you've ever known is the one performing for an audience, that moment is terrifying. The transformation from footballer to father and human being required him to develop new emotional skills. He had to learn empathy, vulnerability, and the ability to connect with others on a deeper level, qualities that were absent from his early life experiences. He had to learn them in his 40s. Qualities that most people develop naturally as children because they had childhoods that allowed for them. Henry had to consciously learn them as an adult because his childhood didn't leave space for any of that. His childhood was about one thing. He's been with his second partner, Bosnian model Andrea Rajacic, since 2011. They have 3 children together, and alongside his daughter T, his children with Andrea include Tristan, born in 2012, Tatiana in 2015, and Gabriel in 2016. 4 children. A family that grew gradually during the same years he was trying to figure out coaching and fighting his own private battles. Henry himself said, "A divorce is never easy, especially when there's a daughter involved." And you believe him, because T's early years were marked by distance, by a father who was miles away in Spain, locked in a custody dispute, seeing his daughter only 5 times in 8 months. And that mirrors something else, doesn't it? A father who was physically present, but emotionally distant. The same wound passed down a generation, wearing a different shape. Today, Henry speaks openly about his mental health journey, hoping to help others who might be fighting similar battles. His focus has shifted from achieving athletic excellence to fostering genuine human connections and supporting others in their struggles. That's a real shift. The man who spent 20 years telling himself and everyone around him that he was fine, who wore an imaginary cloak to survive the most watched moments of his life, is now the man in the podcast seat saying, "I was depressed. I didn't know it. I didn't do anything about it. I was lying to myself." In August 2023, Henry was named manager of the France national under-21 team, taking charge also of the Olympic squad for Paris 2024. He coached them to a silver medal before announcing his resignation in August 2024. He stepped down for personal reasons. It was France's first Olympic football medal of any color since Los Angeles 1984. A genuine achievement, and he walked away from it. Not because it went wrong this time, but for personal reasons. Because something in his life now takes precedence over the football. Because the man who once built his entire identity around performance is, at 48, slowly learning to put down the weight of it. As of December 2025, he joined Fox Sports as a studio analyst for coverage of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. He's back at a microphone, back on camera, still analyzing, still passionate, still sharp. In January 2024, Henry opened up publicly about the psychological cost of growing up with such an exacting father. It was a rare and significant admission from a man not known for emotional vulnerability, and it reframed the narrative of a childhood that from the outside had always looked like the making of a champion. Because here's what the trophies never told you. Here's what the statue outside the Emirates doesn't capture. A man can be the best in the world at what he does and still be quietly broken. A man can win the World Cup and still be searching for something his father never gave him. A man can score goals that make millions of people feel joy and go home that night feeling empty. The story of Thierry Henry's family contains joy and hardship, ambition and sacrifice, separation and survival. It is a very human story, shaped by the Caribbean, forged in the Parisian suburbs, and written in goals at the highest level of world football. For all the complexity of his childhood, Henry has never stopped being the son of Antoine and Mary's, and everything that meant. At 48, Thierry Henry is still doing the hardest work of his life. Not pressing defenders, not finishing chances, not making formations. Learning how to love and be loved, how to connect with his children, how to be vulnerable. None of those things come naturally when a boy is told from age 4 that his worth is measured in goals. But he's learning them slowly, honestly, out loud, in a way that the little boy from Les Ulis never could. And that, more than any trophy, might be the most important thing he ever does. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more